we're Americans. I'm not an Israeli, even though for the last 35 years in Washington, because we're a yarmulke, friends and enemies, I mean, personal friends, personal enemies, friends of Israel's, enemies of Israel's, will, when they talk to me, will always say, your government, your country, your prime minister. I'm not Israeli. I'm an American like you are. You know, stop it. Really stop it. I am an American, but I can say that to people, but I recognize it doesn't matter. When people see a yarmulke, they will automatically make that connection, right? And that's why you see people say, "Oh, no, 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 I don't like Israel's policies." So why are you bashing in the windows of a synagogue in New Jersey? Why are you why are you blowing out, a restaurant in Paris that happens to be Jewish? It's an astonishing concept. There are many, many countries around the world that identify as Christian countries. It's unimaginable that someone would randomly pick on a Christian in America because of something that's happening in a foreign country that's nominally Christian. So this is just the reality. All things Jews, each one of us represents the whole, and the whole represents each of us. When Israel speaks, we're all held accountable.
Hey, Culminators, I have got one of the best guys in the world as a guest today to culminate along with us, Jeff Ballabon. He's been on the show a couple of times, and he's one of those guys who thinks as quickly as I do and who knows he knows the things. He's a former lobbyist. He's a crisis management guy. He is an incredible grandfather, from what I understand.
Thank you.
But he is really the go-to guy for me on the Jewish perspective on the conservative political world, or the conservative perspective on the Jewish world, and everything in between. Jeff, how you doing?
Thank God, and I love to be joining you here from the holy city of Jerusalem.
Oh, so you are in Jerusalem. Okay, because Jeremy and I were trying to figure out which hemisphere you were in today. Jerusalem is a real happening. So did you go and do the idol worship of kissing the wall? This is what I understand is
first of all, I'm in a heaven sphere, not in a hemisphere. Second of all, actually, you asked this, but I about 30 years ago, a friend turned me on to a concept which I have observed ever since, which is that so long as we are in exile and impure, I will not touch the wall. And even though the wall is an exterior retaining wall.
And you have to explain to a lot of people don't understand why you say that we are in exile. After all, don't we have a nation state that's even a member of the United Nations? What could be more exalted than that?
Wait, we're doing sarcasm this time? Okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah, no, not Ron and Jeff, never.
No. So, right, we are, the Torah talks about exile. It's interesting. It uses a double language. It says, I will hide, behold, I will hide my face. And my belief is that, there are many Jews in the diaspora who recognize, obviously, they're in exile. Problem is when Jews in the land of Israel think that they're out of exile, because exile is not, it's not merely a physical thing. For us, until the Messiah comes, until there's the rebuilding of the temple, we are in exile. And no UN-approved Westphalian nation state is the answer to our exile. That's my belief. So I don't touch the wall because even though it's the exterior retaining wall, it is a reminder, a constant reminder. I want to. I grew up touching it and kissing it and crying against it and putting notes inside it. But I find that the denial of myself of that is a constant reminder that we are in fact in exile and that we're still awaiting, and not just awaiting, but working towards hopefully the final redemption, the revelation, redemption. And this is going to be, we can talk about this in political terms and practical terms, because I think it all really applies. But a lot of it has to do with how Israel thinks of itself, how the world thinks of Israel, where Israel is vis-a-vis the Jews. And as esoteric and religious as that is, to me, it is an actual practical day-to-day programmatic issue in terms of how Israel presents itself and how the world sees it.
I think that would be valuable, Jeff. I think that we should actually flesh that out a little bit, because you and I, one of the first things we realized when we met each other at a Federalist Society luncheon about 70 or 80 years ago, One of the first things we both recognized was that we had very similar views on this topic, which is not any novel aspect of Ron and Jeff. It's the standard in our community, but a lot of people are not aware of it. People often ask me, well, as an Orthodox Jew, don't you ex-Israel? And the answer is very frequently different
Yep.
from what they expect it to be. Even though I'm known on the internet as an Israel advocate, I'm not. I'm an Israel people. I'm a Jewish people in Israel and anywhere else advocate.
Right.
Give us the story.
Sure. I've actually been doing a lot of writing about this lately. And actually, I think I have a law review article that's in the works, but there's a memo. So one of the things I do is I work with an organization known as the American Center for Law and Justice, the ACLJ. And it's a constitutional law firm, pro bono law firm, um, founded actually by Pat Robertson, not a Jewish law firm. It's founded to be Christian advocates, but its mission is extremely, everything that you and I both believe in. Also, we're very in sync on First Amendment and how important that is to the core of what it means to be an American, what it means for America, and also for us as a religious, faith minority in America. And so we've been dealing with issues related to anti-Semitism the same way we deal with issues related to any other religion or other ethnic group and discrimination. So since October 7th, there's been a huge surge, and everyone knows about this huge surge of anti-Semitism. And one of the places it manifests the most is on campuses. Nothing news here. I think everyone knows that. And we've been dealing with it for decades, but since October 7th, there's been a huge surge, as I say. And there's also been a huge surge and influx of other practitioners who are working on these issues. And I tend to stand alone among them, although lately people are just beginning to see my point of view. And that is one of the arguments that they're making is that because people attack you, Ron, and me as Zionists, and that's now essentially the worst epithet in the world, is to call someone a Zionist. They're arguing and they're hiding their anti-Semitism behind anti-Zionism, and all of that's true. These lawyers want to argue that it's inherently that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It is in almost all cases, but not in all cases. But they're saying it is inherently, and they want the courts to find that because Zionism is an inherent part of being Jewish, both Jewish ethnicity and Jewish faith. And I argue against that. And just for what you mentioned about our community, we actually polled this a number of years ago. I was asked to consult on a poll about the Orthodox community's views on Donald Trump and on Republicans and on Democrats. This is back during the first Trump administration. And I wasn't being paid, but my quid pro quo was, I want you to ask the following question. And this is, it's a good poll because it's a very sizable sample relative to the population. And because it's based on a magazine that serves the population, it actually knows how to find us. And so the results were, the question was, do you identify as a Zionist, right? I am a Zionist and I am pro-Israel. I am pro-Israel, but I'm not a Zionist. I am neither or no answer. And what was interesting, but not surprising, was that 55% then of this sample identified the way you and I would run as people who are pro-Israel, but not Zionists. And 32%, they were both Zionist and pro-Israel. This is in the Orthodox community. Now, to most people, pro-Israel and Zionist is synonymous. But you and I will understand that it's not. Because Zionism you articulated it just before. The reason we're pro-Israel is not because there's anything uniquely special about the state itself. It's that it is the political entity under which more than half the known Jews in the world live. It is in a dangerous place in the world. It is founded on a small part of the Jews' indigenous homeland. That's important to note because it is only about 25% of the Jews' indigenous homeland based on history. And if you want to be religious about it, based on the Bible's promise, I did the math. Depending on the interpretation, it's between 2% and 5.5% of what is prophesied. But in terms of what we've had, what was the Jewish homeland recognized by the world, the state of Israel only sits on about 25% of it. And that expands and contracts based on what the world likes. So it's not static. And so we care about Israel the same way as Americans, we care about America. The famous bumper stickers that conservatives like in America, which is, I love my country. It's my government I fear or I hate or I don't trust. And it's like, I love my people. I love my land. But the state itself is judged by me by how well it actually defends our people. And therefore, and to me, there are other reasons. Zionism was an idea, again, it is a secular European idea, right? So that the answer, and if you look at the Zionist writings, they were all very clear. The program was to build a Westphalian nation state because they were living at a time of nationalism in the latter half of the 19th century. And so their solution, the solution of European Jews was a schism. One side went Bundism, which is we don't want to separate. We will assimilate within our culture, and we will be good, loyal Germans. That worked out well. The other one is we will have our own nation state and be counted among the nations, and we'll be like Frenchmen because we'll have France, and we'll no longer be this despised minority. And even those who live around the world will know that we have a nation state, so we'll be on equal footing. Well, that hasn't worked out either because the program of a Westphalian nation state is spectacular. Israel is actually extraordinary. That this nation, under this much duress and this much pain and suffering, manages to have the only Western civilization that is reproducing above failure rate, the only one that it lists. It is consistently, despite the trauma, and there is national trauma here, it is always one of the top 10 or 15 happiest countries in the world, right? It really is incredible, and there's so much that we as Americans should be learning from the culture here. So I'm going to stop because I've been yammering a lot, and there are a lot of ways we can go from that. But that's sort of the difference between Zionism, and my argument has been, by the way, yes, anti-Zionism is almost always anti-Semitism, but it's not because Zionism inheres in being Jewish or Judaism. My belief is that Zionists, the name is coined by a guy named Natan Birnbaum in the mid-1800s. He, by the way, 10 or 15 years later, repents and goes back to being an Orthodox Jew and realizes this was a disaster and it's not going to solve the problem. And then there's a vote on what it is. It doesn't mean that Jews should be allowed to have a nation state. That would be true about Indians and French people and any people you want to say. There's nothing Jewish about that. There's nothing Zionist about that, right? It was a political movement. Once it has a state, in my view, Zionism should end. And the more they talk about this, and I've noticed recently that like public intellectuals have begun to say this. I'm saying this for 35 years to Israelis, stop talking about Zionism. That's why your best friends talk about Israel's right to exist as though it's still an argument. When you talk about Zionism, you're talking about a theory as though the existence of the state is a contingency. And that opens the door for everyone else to keep arguing whether it has a right to exist. You exist. Just be a state. And with that, I'll turn it to you so we can see which direction you want to take this.
Well, first of all, I think it would be useful for a lot of listeners if we would define when we refer to our community.
Yeah.
And I've done this in other episodes and in some of my own content, but in this conversation, people, not only non-Jews, but many Jews don't understand what you and I mean when we refer to our community. We're not Hasidim, and yet we don't seem so different from Hasidim compared to a lot of people. It's sort of like when I tell people I'm not from New York or from New Jersey, and almost everyone in the world thinks, what the hell's the difference? and of course, in New York, there's a very big difference.
Yep.
And that's true in many respects regarding Orthodox Jews. I think you are very well qualified to explain the community that we're referring to, and it's how our worldview is framed.
Sure. After October 7th, I was called to go down to Washington to give two briefings. One was to conservative members of Congress have gatherings and staffers. And the other was there's a weekly meeting of just like the conservative organizational world. And that's across the board. It's fiscal conservatives, it's social conservatives, and not everyone agrees on things, but it's like the big tent for the conservative movement. And one of the things what I was trying to explain, they wanted to know what October 7th meant. And they meant what it meant to Israel. But I spent most of the time talking about what it means to Americans. And I said, and in discussing it, I realized, people like you and I grow up in a interestingly schismatic, if that's not the right word, but it's like there's a dichotomy that we're holding two realities at the same time because we grew up in two cultures. We're Americans. I'm not an Israeli, even though for the last 35 years in Washington, because of we're a yarmulke, friends and enemies. I mean, personal friends, personal enemies, friends of Israel's, enemies of Israel's, will, when they talk to me, will always say, your government, your country, your prime minister. I'm not Israeli. I'm an American like you are. You know, stop it. Really stop it. I am an American, but I can say that to people, but I recognize it doesn't matter. When people see a yarmulke, they will automatically make that connection, right? And that's why you see people say, "Oh, no, 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 I don't like Israel's policies." So why are you bashing in the windows of a synagogue in New Jersey? Why are you why are you blowing out, a restaurant in Paris that happens to be Jewish? It's an astonishing concept. There are many, many countries around the world that identify as Christian countries. It's unimaginable that someone would randomly pick on a Christian in America because of something that's happening in a foreign country that's nominally Christian. So this is just the reality. All things Jews, each one of us represents the whole, and the whole represents each of us. When Israel speaks, we're all held accountable. And so what I was trying to explain to my friends in Washington, and they know me as part of their movement for decades, is we in Washington, our horizons are essentially measured in news cycles and at most in election cycles. And no one's thinking past that. Jews, and I don't mean all Jews, I mean those brought up in a traditional community with a traditional background and traditional a sense of history, and it's just built into the faith, don't measure time in news cycles and in election cycles. We measure times in empires and millennia. And so when I look at America, when people say, do you know what time it is? Right? Yeah, I know exactly what time it is. I've known what time it is for a long time. And seeing how the pieces connect, and that I think is my Jewish upbringing, telling me to look from things from a very long distance. And by the way, it's very helpful to understand America's enemies as well as America's friends, because our enemies, our cultural, civil enemies, civilizational enemies, they are also measuring things in terms of empires and millennia. And for example, Israel makes a mistake. Israel talks about wars. There was the 48 War of Independence, the 56 War of Attrition, the 67 Six-Day War, 73 War. It's one war. It's one war in the eyes of our enemies, and Israel has to recognize that. They didn't know what to do with the 12-day war in Iran in the middle of the bigger October 7th War. These are all skirmishes and battles in a war that's been waged against Jews in the Holy Land since the 1920s, actually, since it became evident that Jews were coming back en masse to their homeland. And this war is an existential war. And yes, it is not because they hate Jews in particular. It's because they see us. They see us, especially because the movement that brings them in is a secular, we just talked about this, a secular Western European movement. They see it as an outside infiltrator, and they don't want that culture. And they see it as the point of the Western civilizational spear. And this fight is going back since the dawn of Islam, and it has not ended.
What kind of hearing did you get when were people surprised at that? Were they enlightened? Did they push back?
So I think that because people know me there for decades, I worked on Capitol Hill. I've been working in and out of the movement for a very long time. And people associate with me as far as I know, is very much part of an inner circle. We know each other. We know each other for decades. So they accept it, right? But like I say, the same people will still look at my yarmulke and say your government. And the thing is, it's interesting because they see me very much as aligned as an American as well. So there is duality. But I'll tell you, so of the let's say 20 minutes I had to address the issue, they just gave it to me to talk about what it means. And I know they meant for Israel, but I spent 5 minutes about what it means for Israel and 15 minutes about what it meant for America. And that's what surprised them, especially because I told them a few things. The three main points I made about America is you need to understand that as bad as this was for Israel, it will be worse when it happens in America because we have far more jihadis in America than Israel has. We are much less well prepared to deal with it if and when it happens in America. And by the way, there are things they can do to America I don't want to get into that are actually much more devastating than anything they could ever do to Israel, because America is not as resilient and hardened internally. America still, the isolationist movement, it's a nice conceit, but it does not recognize that America is part of the world. And in fact, it is the focus of most of the world, at any given moment.
And that their lifestyles, their ways of life are dependent on American hegemony.
That's right. That's right. And so number one is the risk to America. And America should wake up and recognize that it needs to deal with this. We don't really have the tools in place. And number two, that it's nice that conservatives and Republicans think that this is the redoubt for Western civilization and that this is supportive of Jews in Israel. And I told them that is not really the case, that we're engaged right now in a great schism on the right side of the aisle and in the party. And again, this is like the second week of October of 2023. This is well before it became really obvious. But again, having the long view, I'm always paying attention to these factors. And that I know they think that, let's say evangelical America, broadly speaking, supports Israel and Jews, but they should recognize that for the last 20 years already, there's been a huge erosion in the under 30s. And that, in fact, under 30 years old, more evangelicals in America support the Palestinian/Hamas side than they do the Israelis and the Jews. And there was huge pushback by Christian leaders in the room. And we spoke about it afterwards, and they've all come around to see that it's true. I said, pay attention to your youth. I also work in Christian media. And I see that for the last 15, 20 years, it's been hard with people who are solid on pro-life and all the other issues. When it comes to Israel, they don't want to get involved. I've been in conferences with presidents and chancellors of Christian universities, colleges going back also about 15 years, alarmed that the incoming students are hostile to Israel and Jews. And this is going back for a while. And now they've begun to pay attention to it since then because they're seeing their truth. And then the final point I made was...
Let me just, stick something in there, which is that
sure.
On the campuses, frequently, now this is not true at Christian schools, but it's certainly true in a big picture, when Israel supporting Gentiles look over their shoulders to see what are the Jews on the faculty and in the administration and in the student body.
Yeah.
What are they doing? And they're not only abandoned, they're those are the ones that they're fighting.
Yeah.
Because these liberal Jews declined to make Israel part of their identity, and in fact, in order to get ahead in their institutions, they could not do so. And they don't even have that residual love of the Jewish people that you and I described. There are very few people who. So what they have that zip code sort of last name Jewish loyalty that is extremely ephemeral. So that's going to undercut even evangelical support.
Yeah. Well, no, that's true. Look, listen, by the way, my biggest problem, we will get to this. I want to finish my point for theirs, is that Israel doesn't understand. And Israel's messaging has been catastrophic. But the last point I made, and people were in total denial. And then a few months later, I was, how did you know this? And again, I'm just paying attention, is I said, and watch Tucker Carlson emerge as the most dangerous anti-Semite in America since Father Coughlin.
Absolutely.
And they were saying, what are you talking about? And I said, and it's more about how he talked about his own Christianity for the last few years that dictated to me where he is. And by the way, because I do work with a lot of pastors, and there are major leaders in America, Christian leaders in America, and universities, churches, pastors, who 15, 20 years ago were, very Semitic. And now they're on the other side. They've been preaching, they've moved from dispensationalism to replacement theology. And we could talk about that too, because I have argued that it's a mistake to think that is dispositive. There are many what are called supersessionists, that the Jews are not the object of the prophecies that's been handed over because the Jews broke the covenant, and it's been handed over to the believers in Christ. That's a very big Christian idea. In fact, that's the foundational idea of Christianity for many centuries. And in America, unique to America, really, arises what became called dispensationalism also in the mid-1800s, which was, no. When it says Israel in the New Testament, it is still referring to the same Israel that the Old Testament referred to, which is literally the descendants, the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, but you can be a dispensationalist. There are nights to pray for Israel where they still are profoundly anti-Semitic. And there are supersessionists who are profoundly philo-Semitic. It is a unique American thing. And I think it's the most important thing we should be talking about, which is where we are today, which is, when I worked on Capitol Hill during Oslo. And Oslo was the time when Israel agreed under pressure to sit across from representatives of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Palestine Liberation, or the PLO, an unmitigated, unvarnished terror organization, and the most reviled political organization on planet Earth. They were chased hounded out of every Arab country, let alone out of Israel. And if the Palestinian contribution to the world really is them, because they created the idea of Palestinian Arab. It never existed before that. Palestinian only meant Jew before that, and their contribution was murdering innocent people. That's essentially was their contribution. And my argument to the negotiators, whom I knew, because again, I was the guy with the yarmulke on Capitol Hill, the only one. So as soon as this happens, everybody's calling me. What does it mean? What does it mean? You must know. And here come the Israelis, right? So, and I said, let me explain what you're doing, okay? I said, well, what do you think the chances of negotiated peace with them? They said 0. They said, we can give them everything and they're never going to take it. I said, so then why are you doing this? Pressure from the West. I remember this conversation so clearly. I said, let me explain what you're doing. You're not only painting a target, you're not only destroying the state of Israel and taking a target on every Jew in the world, you are crashing Western civilization. Why? And all morality. Why? It seems like a very bold statement, right? To say that this negotiation should challenge all of Western civilization, except when you look at what's happening today, when for some podunk post on city council in middle America, or of mayor of some town in, I don't know, Scotland or in Lithuania, the only thing they want to know is how much do you hate Israel? That's like the litmus test. Why? Why is that happening? And so my understanding of it, and I've never seen anyone else write about this, but I believe this is true, and I'm beginning to write more about this, is, human beings function based on narrative. Ben Shapiro likes saying facts have no feelings. That's true, but the only salient facts culturally are feelings. That's how all decisions are made. And the narrative that America was founded on was unique. It was not, again, like our enemies, and I don't mean just the Jewish enemies, I mean the enemies of America, right? Whether it's the radical Islamists, the radical progressives, or the radical, they call themselves Christian nationalists, but they're actually pagan, tribalists. They all converge at one point, which is the evil, the lie, the blasphemy of Judeo-Christianity. That's what they say. Tucker Carlson, that the people he dislikes most in the world, not Jews, Christians who support Jews. And they talk about this. So what is Judeo-Christian? So Judeo-Christian is a term that came into being really after World War II and was popularized by Eisenhower, who's a very, very religious man. And based on what he saw, not just the Nazis doing, but the Soviets doing, right? He realized that America is uniquely blessed because America stands for something for the first time in the history of the world, a nation not chosen by God, but created by man around the vision delivered through the Bible to humans, right? And so, yes, America's created by white European Christians, but white European Christians fleeing white European Christianity to found something new. And that is America, Judeo-Christian. And so what I'm explaining to the Israelis is, when Israel, which is seen to be the voice of Jews, rightly or wrongly, sits across the table from the most reviled, evil terrorists in the world who clearly have no claim to this land. They're not indigenous at all. At all. Yasser Arafat, born in Egypt, okay? Arabs come from Arabia, not Judea. Jews come from Judea. These are people from abroad who have been occupiers for a long time, and that was the war between Christians and Muslims for many years, for centuries, over the Holy Land. What Israel's doing is it's ratifying a lie. It's saying that whole Bible story, about God making promises to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob about the land, and then to Moses and Joshua about the land. It's not true. Because if it were true, it's inexplicable that the bearers of the title to that land, the Jewish people, would recognize and acknowledge as interlocutors a group of outside colonial terrorists as though they have rights in this land, when no one else has rights in this land. No one else has rights in this land. And so you're destroying not some side story, it's the literal load-bearing narrative of Western civilization, is the story of the Jews and the land of Israel. And when you destroy that, other narratives come rushing in. And there are only 3 other narratives in the world, okay? Because there's the Islamist narrative, which is God is everything and humanity is worthless, okay? And that's corrupt and evil. There is the Marxist narrative, which is man is everything and God is nothing, and that's corrupt and evil. And then there's this pre-Judeo-Christian, sort of the Christianity that rejects the full testament, the full history, right? And that one, we saw what that was. We saw that what that led over centuries, were not just them killing the Jews in the Holocaust, but century after century, group after group claiming to be fighting in the name of the same God, but actually fighting for blood and treasure, because really it's all just pagans, right? Tribalists killing each other. And those are the only narratives that are out there besides the Judeo-Christian narrative, which is what America was founded on. And unfortunately, I believe that Israel, meaning well, Israel doesn't project sort of the evil of the world. It doesn't understand. It projects its own humanity on other people. And I try to explain to them that's the reason you're being accused of genocide by these people is because that's what they would do, right? And I know you can't imagine it, but that's actually what they would do. And they don't really understand that. And so they thought, sure, we'll show that we're nice and we'll give it a shot. And if the others reject it, then the world will learn. But all they learned was to destroy the narrative that created America, honestly.
What do you think in the time that we have remaining? What do you think we can do other than have conversations like this, which I think obviously I wouldn't bother doing it, certainly not doing it for money. What do you think we can do besides making our views understood and thought and heard as activists, which we are?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I split my time now between America and Israel, and I have for the last several years, a few weeks here, a few weeks there. And it's intentionally so, because I really feel as though neither side fully understands the other, and yet each side appreciates each other deeply. And I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian part of America. I'm not talking about the ones who clearly hate America. I mean, they're trying to, even on their own terms, forget about Israel, right? The terms of, well, we conservative Christians were treated badly. You know, we white males were treated badly for 50 years by the dominant, by those who held the dominant structures of power in America. We're going to show them by treating them the same way. That's not the solution. That just burns America down. That creates civil war. All right. The solution is we will respond in the same way the founding fathers did. It doesn't mean we don't fight for what's right, but it's not about scapegoating other people, blaming other people. It's not about resentment and victimhood. It's about actually forging a better society based on Judeo-Christian values. It is the America really has been the single most successful human collective experiment in history because of this. And we cannot let it collapse. And so part of it is, for me, is to try to communicate in America about what I see going on, but in Israel, also try to get Israelis to understand, you guys live in this tiny little bubble. You live in a tiny little bubble. It's now, let's say, the third generation here. So there's very little understanding about how other people think. Okay. And they keep on, again, projecting and projecting and projecting that if we're a little bit nicer, if only we show that we're the world's, we're the world's, and it's funny to hear this given all the claims, the world's most gentle touch when it comes to waging war. We will actually sacrifice our own soldiers to protect our enemies, right? Just the so-called civilian enemies. But no one believes it. In fact, and I try to explain to them, it just makes you look guilty in their eyes, because they would never do it. So they figure you're trying to, or when Israel likes to talk about how progressive it is, immediately the gay and lesbian movements, it actually infuriates them. I explain to them, you want to have pride, praise, that's great, but you talk about it, you're actually infuriating progressives. So I'm just trying to get them to understand how the rest of the world thinks.
Let me, you might, if you don't want to answer this question, I'll cut it. JD Vance.
Sure, I don't want to answer the question. No, I'll answer the question. I'm deeply disturbed. So I'll tell you, I mean, I'd like to hold out hope, but I went to Yale Law School. JD went to Yale Law School, and I remember looking at Hillbilly Elegy and thinking, this is a victimhood mentality, right? Which is exactly the kind of mentality we shouldn't have. He's sort of, look at what an outsider I am. Look, I come from these other circumstances, and I'm like them. And think, really, JD, try not being able to go out to eat with your friends and classmates because you keep kosher. Try not being able to hang out with them because it's Shabbat. Meaning, I'm not resentful. I'm not a victim of that. I love my culture. I celebrate my culture, and I welcome and celebrate everybody else's. That's fine. I remember in law school, a classmate attacked me. You know what's wrong with you people? By the way, who's a Jew? He means, you people. You know what's wrong with you people? You're particularists, okay? You're not pluralists. And I'd never heard that before. And I said, you know what's wrong with you people? It's that you delude yourself into thinking that pluralism isn't just another particularism. At least I know it, and therefore I accommodate everybody else's. You disrespect everybody else's because unless they think just like you, right, you attack them for being particularists. And that's really been a truth all along. I actually, I know that we're running out of time, and I don't know what you're going to cut to fill this in, but there is a message I would like to give, if you don't mind. because,
Not only do I not mind, I will take as much time as I want for you to say
okay, my brother, thank you so much. Recently I was hosting friends, and people that I truly love that I've been working with for decades, and they don't know each other. And they're two, and I won't get too specific. They're two different Christian groups, and boy, do they dislike each other. Not personally, they don't know each other personally, but they each one really dislikes the other one, and each one will say the other one is the genuine Christian. I really don't care to get into it because it doesn't really matter. And it was troubling to me because everyone is being polite because, again, they love Jews, they love Israel, they love Jeff. All those things are great because we're in Israel, surrounded by Jews, and I'm me. And we're working together. And these guys have been working around the clock, really, with whatever else they do. They have accomplished great things as Americans for constitutional issues and great things for the Jews and for Israel as well. They're all proven that they will actually sacrifice much of their lives in supporting of Judeo Christianity. And I finally said, I'm going to just address the unspoken elephant in the room because we're in Jerusalem. And even though my home as a citizen is America, my ancestral and religious home is here. So, and since, I'm going to I say this, listen, we all believe, right? All of us believe in our different faiths that we're supposed to see God as a father, as a master, and as a king. And they all agree, right? Those ideas are now. I don't believe God is any of those because God is not human and God is above all these things. What they are is ways, they're anthropomorphisms. They're ways for humans to be able to understand God, and we're instructed to think that way, which means there's a reason God wants us to think of God that way. So I don't know what it's like to be a king. I don't have subjects. I don't like to be a master. I don't have servants, but I know what it's like to be a father because thank God I'm blessed with children. And so how do I know what God wants? Well, I only know if I'm told to believe he's a father. I have to look at my own experience. What does it mean to be a father? So to me, what it means to be a father is that I want my children to know the depths of this truth. And this tends to get me emotional because it's the depths of everything for me, that my love for them is absolutely unconditional. There's nothing they could ever do that would make me love them any less. My love for them is all consuming and unconditional. That doesn't mean, in fact, because of that, sometimes I might get upset. I might get disappointed. I might get frustrated. I might even get angry, right? That could happen. Guess what? God does too, right? We're told that. But not because I don't love them, because I do love them. And that I want them to know that, and that I want them to keep me in their lives because I want to be there to do anything I can to help them in this world. But you know what I want? Infinitely more than I want even that, Ron. I mean, a million times more than I want that. I want them to feel that way about each other. Because if my children, hated me but loved each other, it would hurt, but I could deal with it. But if my children loved me and hated each other, I'd be inconsolable. And so I take that and I say, look, I don't know really what God wants, except for what he tells me he wants. And if he tells me he's a father, then this is what I know, that the worst thing we could ever do is fight over how to love him, fight over how to serve him, right? That's just absurd. I love you, Faith X, for searching for how to be a good and loyal child or subject or servant of our Father, right? I'm not jealous of you. I don't resent it. You don't have to think it the same way I do. I'm limited. I'm human. I'm doing the best I can. And I recognize you are also. And I love you for that, right? And when we can love each other for that, we know that's what serves God. And I really just believe that's the truth. And my vision and my hope is that maybe, and by the way, I said to them, it's not like this is wisdom handed down to Jews. This is wisdom that Jews have to learn after thousands of years of not learning that. That every time we fight against each other, that's when calamities happen to us, right? It's that unity is the only thing that's important to God. And it doesn't just mean unity amongst ourselves. Like, I love my family, Ron. I'm not insulted if you love your family. I don't want to convert you to loving my family most, right? I'm happy that you love your family. I'm happy that they love their faiths. We don't need them to convert to our faiths because that's not our mission in life. Our mission in life should be by our existence, by our behavior, and by our history for the world to see that the one thing that matters is to actually serve each other and get along each other, because that's what God does. He creates us and then he spends the rest of the time just serving us, right? And that's the most godly thing of all. That's what I believe. By the way, this now, in this decade of my existence as a Jew in the world, that's pretty much the sum and substance of my faith, Ron.
On that note, Jeff, incredible. Thanks for joining us from Israel. Thanks for your international culmination. And have a great summer. I hope that I see you soon in person.